The human ship Hope Seeker floated gently above the planet Virella, shining like a silver feather in the green skies. This was humanity's first real contact with the Virellan species. The mission was peaceful: trade, knowledge, and maybe friendship among. The humans was Daniel Rivers, a quiet but clever technician. He was not a captain or a warrior. He fixed engines, programmed defense grids, and made sure machines didn't explode. But today, he had been asked to attend the welcoming ceremony on the surface. "I'm just a mechanic," Daniel had said, raising his eyebrows. "Yes," replied Captain Mia Torres, "but you're calm, polite, and not terrifying. That's what we need right now." So, wearing a clean uniform and a nervous smile, Daniel stepped onto the transport shuttle and flew down to Virella. The city of Leorai, capital of the Virellan people, was beautiful. Towering white buildings stood like crystals, glowing softly in the sunset. The streets curved like rivers, and small creatures with blue feathers flew between the trees. Daniel stood among other human guests in a garden made of floating stones. Alien music played in the background, soft and dreamlike. The Vireyans arrived in silence. They were small, graceful beings, no taller than a child but clearly adults. Their skin was pale with hints of lavender. Their eyes were large, glowing slightly, and their hair came in strange colors, mostly green, teal, and silver. One of them walked up to Daniel. She wore a simple, elegant robe, and her teal hair fell to her shoulders. Her soft eyes looked at him kindly. Then she smiled and said something in perfect English. "You were assigned a wife, and it's me." Daniel blinked. His mind froze. What?" She bowed her head slightly. "I am Sayalari. I was told your name is Daniel Rivers." That's right," he said slowly. "But wife? What do you mean?" Sayalari looked puzzled. "Your people agreed to the Harmony Bond program. 2 beings from 2 worlds, matched by our elders. It is how we welcome peaceful outsiders." Daniel looked around. No one else seemed to be reacting. Some other humans were speaking with Virellans, but no one looked as surprised as he felt. He turned his communicator on and whispered, "Captain, I think there's been a mistake." Captain Torres replied, "No mistake. It was in the agreement papers. We didn't think they'd take it literally. Just smile and don't offend her." Daniel sighed and turned back to Sayalari. "All right. This is just unexpected." Sayalari gave a small laugh. "Yes, for me too. But I read about human customs. You are not forced. You may choose." Her voice was calm, not demanding. She did not grab his hand or claim ownership. She simply stood there, looking at him with a kind smile. Daniel scratched the back of his neck. "You know what? Let's talk. I'd like to understand this better." She nodded and led him through the garden. As they walked, Virellans moved aside, bowing their heads politely. Daniel noticed they all seemed quiet, gentle, and soft-spoken. They sat by a small pond. The water was clear and shimmered like glass. Floating petals danced across the surface. "I thought your people were taller," Sayalari said suddenly. Daniel laughed. "And I thought your people wouldn't assign me a wife. The moment I landed, they both smiled." "I am not what you expected then?" Sayalari asked. Daniel shrugged. "You're different, but not in a bad way." She seemed pleased. "That's a good start." They talked about small things: food, homes, how many moons their planets had. Daniel learned that Virellans lived longer than humans, but aged slower. They did not lie easily, and their emotions were often expressed through hand movements and posture, not loud words. Then Sayalari told him something that made him sit up straighter. "I chose this bond," she said. "Others had choices too. I asked for you." "You asked for me? Why?" "You looked kind. When I saw your profile, I felt calm, And you're not loud. Loud people scare me. Daniel didn't know what to say. He felt strangely honored. He also felt nervous. He wasn't ready to be bonded to anyone, especially not an alien from a different world. But there was no pressure in her eyes. No trick, just honesty. He finally said, "Well, maybe we can start as friends. That okay?" She smiled again. "Yes, that is more than okay." That evening, Daniel returned to the Hope Seeker, and Scifi came with him. Viralan. Law allowed it. Bonded pairs could live wherever they chose. When they entered his quarters, it felt strange. He had only one bed, one chair, and leftover noodles on the counter. "I did not expect a palace," Salari said, laughing. "This is fine." She brought a small box with her. Inside were tea leaves, tiny carved stones, and a folded cloth with glowing patterns. She began placing them on the table. "This is for the first night," she explained. "It is not a mating custom, just a ritual for trust." Daniel nodded. "Got it, no pressure, just tea." They sat across from each other. She poured the tea and he drank it. It tasted like flowers and something slightly sour. For a moment there was silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt peaceful. Daniel looked at her, really looked. She was small, yes, but not fragile. Her eyes held strength. She had a soft, natural beauty, and her presence was calm like a still lake. "You're different from anyone I've ever met," he said. She replied, "So are you." Outside the window, the stars glowed above Virella. A new world, a new connection, and maybe, just maybe, a new beginning. The next morning, Daniel Rivers woke up and blinked at the soft light coming through the window. Virella's sun was pale yellow and warmed the room like a gentle blanket. He stretched, yawned, and turned his head. Sailari was already awake. She sat cross-legged on the floor, her eyes closed, hands resting on her knees. A soft hum came from her lips. Daniel watched quietly for a moment. She looked peaceful, surrounded by the strange glowing stones she had unpacked last night. He cleared his throat. Good morning." Sailari opened her eyes slowly. "Morning, Daniel." "You been sitting like that since dawn?" he asked. "This is part of my morning silence. It helps me stay balanced. It is our way." He nodded. "Cool. I just drink coffee and try not to fall back asleep." She tilted her head, smiling. "Coffee? That bitter-smelling liquid?" "Exactly." He chuckled and walked to the machine, near the wall. "Want to try it?" "I am ready to learn," she said politely. They sat together at the table. Daniel handed her a small cup. She took a careful sip and coughed lightly. "Very strong," she said, blinking. "But interesting." "Yeah," Daniel laughed. "That's how we wake up, with a kick to the throat." Sailari giggled softly. "You humans are strange." "And so are you," he replied. "But in a good way." They shared breakfast. Well, Daniel had toast and protein spread. Sailari had brought a jelly-like fruit she called Carol. It looked like glowing green pudding, but she offered some kindly. Daniel tried it. It was sweet, but it tingled his tongue. "Wow," he said. "It's like candy and electricity." Sailari smiled again. "Then you like it?" "I think I do." After breakfast, Daniel took Sailari on a small tour of the ship. The Hope Seeker was not fancy, but it was efficient. They walked through the engineering bay first. Daniel showed her the engines, the coolant pipes, and the backup power core. "You fix all this?" she asked. "Yep, I'm the guy who keeps this ship from exploding." "That sounds very brave. It's mostly just dirty work." Still, Sailari looked impressed. She watched everything with wide eyes, asking questions politely. Next, they visited the garden dome, where earth plants grew in clean rows. She ran her fingers over the leaves gently. "These plants are full of life," she whispered. "On Virella, We grow them in open air, not domes. Earth's not always friendly, Daniel explained. Some places are too cold or too dry. We do what we can. As they walked, other crew members noticed them. Some smiled and waved. A few looked surprised to see a Viralan walking beside Daniel. One of the engineers, Juno, raised an eyebrow. You showing her the whole ship already, Rivers? Daniel shrugged. She's part of the cultural exchange now. Might as well let her see how we do things. Juno nodded slowly, but Daniel could feel a little tension in the air. Not everyone liked surprises. Later that day, Sayalari offered to show Daniel parts of Liore, the Virilan city. Now it is my turn to teach, she said gently. Daniel agreed, and they took a shuttle down to the surface. The city was even more beautiful in the daylight. Floating bridges connected buildings. Trees grew along the rooftops. Soft-colored banners danced in the wind. Sayalari led him to a large circular structure, with no doors. Instead, a glowing arch shimmered as they stepped through it. What is this place? Daniel asked. A memory hall, she said. It holds stories of our people. Inside, floating lights showed holograms of ancient events, Virelans dancing under moons, ships rising from oceans, children learning to walk on narrow beams. Sayalari pointed to a glowing image of two figures holding hands, one Viralan, one alien. This was the first bond with another species, a long time ago, she explained. It ended in peace, but many were afraid. We still try. Daniel looked at the image for a long moment. It's hard to trust sometimes. I get that. She nodded. But if no one tries, no one learns. Over. The next few days, Daniel and Sayalari settled into a quiet rhythm. They shared meals, walks, and stories. Sayalari was curious about earth music, so Daniel played her soft guitar tunes. She closed her eyes and swayed to the sound. In return, she taught him a Virelan hand game that looked like dancing fingers. Daniel failed terribly at first, making her laugh until she cried. At night, they sat beside the window, sipping warm herbal tea. Sayalari would tell him about her family. My mother is a healer, she said one evening. My father writes cloud poems. What, are cloud poems? Daniel asked. Short thoughts, sent into the wind. The clouds carry them. Sounds beautiful, Daniel said. My dad worked in a garage. He loved fixing old bikes, Sayalari smiled. Then maybe we are not so different, but not everything was easy. One night, Daniel found a small metal piece under his bed. It looked like part of a listening device. He picked it up and turned to Sayalari. This isn't mine. Do you know what it is? She froze. Her face turned, pale. That's a spy piece. Someone is watching us. Daniel frowned. Why? Some Virelans do not trust the bond program. They think humans are dangerous. Maybe they don't want us together. Daniel stood up, angry but calm. Do you feel safe with me? Yes, she said quickly. I trust you. Then we deal with this together. He took the device to the captain and reported it. An investigation began quietly. No one wanted to ruin the peace talks, but now Daniel knew. Someone out there didn't want him and Sayalari to succeed. That night, Sayalari sat silently in the corner, her eyes full of worry. Daniel walked over and knelt beside her. Hey, you, okay? I am afraid this bond is too heavy for you, she whispered. He shook his head. It's not heavy, just new. You're not a problem, Sayalari. You're kind of amazing. She looked at him with big eyes. You don't want to end it? No, Daniel said. Let's keep learning, one step at a time. Sayalari reached out and gently touched his hand. Then I am not afraid anymore. Outside, the wind carried soft music through the trees of Virela. Inside, two very different Leaves began to slowly grow closer, bonded not by force but by choice. 3 weeks had passed since Daniel Rivers and Sayalari had first met. Life had started to feel normal, at least as normal as it could be for a human technician living with a Virilan partner on a new planet. They shared meals, explored gardens, laughed over small things, and even started working on a translator tool together to make communication smoother between humans and Virilans. But things were not as peaceful as they seemed on the surface. Daniel was fixing a power junction on Deck 3 of the Hope Seeker when Captain Mia Torres called him to the command room. "We've received a warning," she said, "from Virilan Internal Security." Daniel wiped his hands and frowned. "What kind of warning?" "There's a group here on Virella. They're called the Old Sky, Virilan nationalists. They don't like outsiders, especially not humans, bonding with their own." Daniel crossed his arms. "Is it serious?" "It might be," Captain Torres replied. "They've been spreading messages quietly. They think humans are a mistake, dangerous, unclean." Daniel looked down. "They think Sayalari made a mistake." Captain Torres nodded slowly. "We can increase ship security, but you're bonded. Now. That makes you visible." "I can handle myself," Daniel said. "But Sayalari doesn't deserve this." Later that night, Daniel and Sayalari walked through the quiet city of Liore. The sky was dark teal, filled with tiny stars. The streets glowed softly under their feet. Daniel hadn't told her everything yet. But she could sense something was wrong. "You are tense," she said softly, "like a string pulled too tight." Daniel stopped walking and turned to her. "There's a group, the Old Sky. They don't like humans. They don't like us." Sayalari's face became serious. "I know, I've heard of them." "You knew?" "I didn't want to worry you. But yes, they believe only pure Virellans should shape the future. They think bonds with aliens are a weakness." Daniel shook his head. "Then why did your leaders allow the bond program?" "Because most of us don't think that way," Sayalari answered. "But the Old Sky is old and angry. They whisper in quiet places." Daniel placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "We need to be careful." She nodded. "But we also need to be strong. If we hide, they win." A few days later, something happened that changed everything. Daniel had gone to visit the human supply station on the edge of the city. He was helping upgrade their shield system with Virilan tech when suddenly alarms started flashing. The power core began to overload. Lights flickered. Sparks flew from the ceiling. "Evacuate the building!" someone shouted. Daniel didn't run. Instead, he rushed to the central panel and started typing commands. A coolant pipe had been cut on purpose. Someone had sabotaged the station. He shouted to the other engineers, "Get everyone out, I'll hold the system." They hesitated, but then followed his command. Daniel stayed behind, sweat running down his forehead. He rerouted power, shut off, damaged conduits, and finally forced the core to cool manually. The station went dark. The danger had passed. Later, in the emergency tent, Sayalari ran to Daniel and wrapped her arms around him tightly. "I heard what happened," she said. "You could have died." Daniel smiled tiredly. "Yeah, but the building didn't blow up. I call that a win." The Virilan authorities arrived and started investigating. They confirmed what Daniel already knew. It was sabotage. A message had been left on the broken pipe, scratched in the metal. It read, "No bonds, no blending, no humans." The Old Sky had struck. Daniel stood before the Human Virilan Council the next morning. Officials from both sides sat at a long table. News cameras floated nearby, recording everything. Sayalari sat beside Daniel, holding his hand tightly. "I don't want war," Daniel said clearly. "I don't want fear, but if someone thinks hurting people will stop this bond, they're wrong." A Virellan elder with silver hair spoke gently. "We are deeply sorry. What you and Sayalari have done is brave. It shows hope. Another counselor, however, seemed more cautious. Perhaps the bond program is too fast. Perhaps we should pause and reconsider. Scifi stood up suddenly. Her voice was clear but calm. If you pause, they win. The old sky used fear before. They failed. We should not let them rise again. Daniel looked at her with pride. She was small, but her voice reached everyone in the room. That evening, Daniel and Scifi returned to their shared room on the ship. The lights were dim, and the stars outside blinked gently. Scifi sat near the window, her knees pulled close to her chest. "You okay?" Daniel asked softly. "I'm worried," she said. "I chose this bond because I believed in you, in us. But now my people might suffer because of it." Daniel sat beside her. "This isn't your fault. You didn't hurt anyone. You've only tried to make peace." She looked at him with sad eyes. "I don't want to be the reason two worlds grow apart." Daniel shook his head. "You're not. You're the reason they might come together." The next morning, something unexpected happened. A small group of Virelans stood outside the human landing platform. They held signs made of glowing cloth. One said, "Peace needs courage." Another read, "Bonds are bridges." They were there for Daniel and Scifi. More Virelans joined throughout the day. Some humans came too. Together they began singing songs from both cultures, creating a sound that was both strange and beautiful. Daniel and Scifi watched from above. "They're standing with us," Daniel said softly. Scifi wiped a tear from her cheek. "Then maybe the old voices will finally fade." But peace never comes without struggle. That night, Daniel returned to his room alone. Scifi had gone to meet her cousin at the central library. As he stepped inside, he noticed the window had been opened. A cold breeze blew through the room. Then he saw it, scratched into the wall beside the door. "Leave Virela, or she will disappear." Daniel froze. His heart pounded. He grabbed his communicator. "Scifi, are you safe? Answer me now." No reply. "Scifi." Still silence. Panic rose. In his chest, he sprinted down the hallway, yelling for the security team. "Someone's after her! I need help!" Daniel ran through the hallways of the Hope Seeker, his heart beating faster than ever before. His legs hurt, but he didn't stop. Scifi's last message had been hours ago. The threat scratched into his wall kept repeating in his mind. "Leave. Virela, or she will disappear." He reached the command center and burst through the door. "Captain Torres!" he shouted. "Scifi's gone. She was meeting her cousin at the central library, but I've had no contact since. Someone broke into my room and left a threat." The captain stood up quickly. "We'll find her. I'm alerting Virelan security now. They'll search the library and nearby streets." Daniel shook his head. "There's no time to wait. I'm going down there myself." Captain Torres didn't argue. She handed him a tracker and nodded. "Take this. If you find anything, signal us. We'll come." The city of Liore looked calm from above, but Daniel knew something was wrong. As the shuttle landed near the library, he jumped out before it even touched the ground. He asked everyone he saw. Virelans passing by, security guards, even street vendors. No one had seen Scifi, but her cousin, a quiet Virelan named Yeliri, gave him a clue. "She left early," Yeliri said nervously. "She received a message. It said to meet someone in the Temple of Winds. She didn't tell me who. I thought it was official business." Daniel clenched his jaw. "The Temple of Winds? Where's that?" Yeliri pointed toward the mountains at the edge of the city. "Old tunnels. Abandoned. It's a sacred place, but no one goes there now." Daniel thanked her and left immediately. The air grew colder as Daniel reached the temple ruins. The mountains were quiet, too quiet. Thin mist floated near the rocks. The temple entrance was cracked and worn, with strange symbols glowing faintly on the walls. He stepped inside. The hallway was long and curved, leading deep underground. Old Virellan lamps still worked, lighting the path with soft green light. As he walked farther, he heard faint voices, angry, sharp whispers. He moved quietly, staying in the shadows. Then he saw them. 4 figures in dark robes stood in a large stone chamber. In the center was Scifi. Her hands were tied behind her back, and her mouth was covered with a soft cloth. Her eyes were wide, but calm. A tall Virellan male stepped forward and spoke. She betrayed her kind. She chose a human. She broke our purity. Daniel stepped into the light. Let her go. The Virellans turned sharply. Their leader narrowed his eyes. You should not be here. Daniel didn't flinch. You're scared of change, so you use fear. You tied up someone who only wanted peace. She brought poison into our world, the leader said, and now we remove it. Daniel held up his hands. You really think hurting her will make your planet stronger? That fear will bring unity? The others hesitated. Even in that tense moment, Sayalari's eyes focused on Daniel. She didn't scream or cry. She just watched him, trusting him. Don't want to fight, Daniel said, but I won't walk away either. If you want to hurt her, you'll have to go through me. There was silence. Then one of the younger Virellans stepped back. This is not what we agreed. We were only supposed to warn her. The leader turned sharply. She is a traitor, and he is filth. The young one shook his head. I won't be part of this. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the chamber. Captain Torres, speaking through Daniel's comm unit. Security units are arriving. You have 30 seconds to surrender. Panic spread among the robed figures. The leader turned and ran deeper into the tunnels. 2 others followed. The one who had spoken up stayed behind and raised his hands. I surrender, he said quietly. Daniel rushed forward, untied Sayalari, and pulled the cloth from her mouth. She gasped for air and looked up at him. You came. Of course I did, Daniel said, helping her to her feet. I always will. Back on the ship, Sayalari rested while Daniel stood outside her door. Captain Torres came to speak with him. You did well, she said. Daniel shook his head. They would have hurt her. I couldn't let that happen. We've contacted the Virellan Council. They're furious. The old Sky Group will be hunted down and shut down. You made a difference today, Daniel. He nodded. But they won't stop with one failure. More people like them will rise. Maybe, the captain said. But now they know. Humanity won't run. The next day, Sayalari walked with Daniel through the gardens of the Hope Seeker. Her body was still weak, but her steps were steady. I was afraid they would break me, she whispered. Daniel looked at her gently. They didn't. You're stronger than they'll ever be. She smiled softly. I saw you standing in front of them, not afraid. I've never felt so safe. They sat on a bench, looking up at the stars through the glass dome. This bond wasn't meant to be tested this way, Sayalari said. But maybe that's how we know it's real, Daniel replied. When we survive something hard, together. She looked into his eyes. I didn't expect to feel this close to you. When I said you were assigned a wife, I didn't know what would come next. Daniel chuckled. Neither did I. But now, she said, I don't want to go back to life without you in it. Daniel took her hand gently. Then don't. Stay. We'll figure the rest out. She leaned her head on his shoulder. This is not just a bond between people. It's a bond between 2 worlds. As the night sky wrapped the planet in soft shadows, a quiet peace returned. For now. But deep in the city, new voices whispered. Some supported the bond. Others still feared. But one thing was clear. The story of Daniel and Sayalari had already changed Virella. And it wasn't over yet. A soft breeze moved across the gardens of the Hope Seeker, carrying the scent of glowing flowers from Virella's nearby forests. Daniel and Scifi sat quietly under a curved glass tree dome, their fingers lightly touching. The stars above sparkled, like frozen diamonds. It had been 1 week since the rescue from the Temple of Winds, 1 week since the old Sky Group had tried to destroy their bond. Now, everything was changing. The Virelan High Council had called for an emergency meeting. Both Virelan and human leaders sat at a long, shining table in the Great Hall of Harmony. News drones hovered silently above, recording every word. It was the first open discussion between the two species since the bond program had started. Scifi wore a silver-blue robe, her teal hair braided with soft white threads. She looked calm, but Daniel could feel her hand trembling slightly. He squeezed it gently. "You've got this," he whispered. She nodded. Elder Valari, a respected Virelan leader with glowing silver eyes, stood and addressed the room. "We came here today to ask one question. Should the bond between Virelans and humans continue or end?" A long silence followed. Then Scifi rose from her seat. Her voice was soft, but it carried across the hall. "When I was told I would be bonded to a human, I was afraid. I knew nothing about Earth, about their ways, or their people. But I agreed, because I believed that peace doesn't grow from comfort. It grows from courage." She turned to Daniel and smiled. "I found not only a partner, but a friend, and a protector. Our bond was tested by fear, and it survived. It grew stronger." She looked back to the council. "Some Virelans still fear the bond, but if we stop now, we let fear win. And I choose something else. I choose hope." Soft murmurs spread through the room. Even some elders nodded quietly. Daniel stood next. He wasn't used to speaking in big rooms. He wasn't a leader or a soldier. But he looked around and spoke from his heart. "I didn't come here to marry someone. I came here to fix engines, clean filters, and maybe enjoy a peaceful new world. But I met Scifi, and she changed everything. Not by force, not by law, but by being herself." He paused. "You want to know if the bond is worth it? I can't speak for everyone, but I can say this. We're better together than apart. We learn from each other. We help each other. And we're stronger because of it." He looked across the room. "Peace isn't easy, but neither is war. And between the two, I know what I'd rather build." The room was silent again, but this time, the silence was warm. That evening, the council sent out an official message. The bond program will continue, with changes. From now on, bonds would be chosen freely, not assigned. Both humans and Virelans could request matches, but only if both sides agreed. No one would be forced. It was a small change, but an important one. A step forward. Daniel and Scifi walked back to their room on the Hope Seeker, tired but smiling. "We did it," Daniel said softly. Scifi looked at him. "No, we're doing it, one step at a time." The next few weeks brought big changes. Daniel and Scifi were invited to speak at schools across Virella. Children listened with wide eyes as they talked about Earth, about bonds, about courage. Some children even drew pictures of humans and Virelans holding hands. More humans began signing up for the bond program, not for politics, but for curiosity. They wanted to learn, to connect. More Virelans joined too, some shy at first, others excited. The first new voluntary bond was between a human musician and a Virelan wind dancer. Their first performance together was broadcast across both worlds. Things weren't perfect. Some groups still grumbled in the shadows. Some people still feared the future. But now, there was something stronger in the air. Trust. One day, as Daniel Worked in the engineering room, Salari entered holding something behind her back. He smiled when he saw her. "You're hiding something," she giggled. "Maybe." He put down his tools and stood up. "Okay, show me." She revealed a small glass orb glowing gently with blue light. Inside was a tiny tree, a mix between Earth's bonsai and Varella's. "Light wood? This," she said, "is called a unity bloom. It only grows when it receives care from two different kinds of beings. One must be Virellan. The other must be something else." Daniel took the orb in his hands. "And it's growing?" "Yes," she whispered. "Just like us." He placed the orb on the shelf near their window. Then he turned to her and asked, "Do you ever regret it? Choosing me?" She shook her head slowly. "No, I was assigned a husband, but I found a partner." Daniel smiled and reached for her hand. "And I was assigned a stranger, but I found home." Months passed. The Human Virellan Academy opened its doors, a place where both species could learn together. Daniel and Salari became part-time teachers, sharing lessons on tech, nature, and bonding. They were no longer just the first bond. They were symbols of what was possible. One evening, as they sat together under the stars, Salari leaned against him and said, "There are still many bridges to build." Daniel nodded. "Then let's keep building them. Together." Final scene. In Ni, the sky above Virella, new ships flew between Earth and the Virellan world, carrying students, explorers, and dreamers. On the ground, in a quiet home filled with plants, books, and tools, Salari stood by the window watching the sky. Daniel walked up behind her, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. She smiled and whispered, "You were assigned a wife." "And it was me." Daniel kissed her temple gently and replied, "And I couldn't have asked for anyone better."